Elara and the Mountain Spring. At the edge of an old valley, where the hills were green in spring and bronze in summer, there lived a girl named Elara. She was not the strongest child in the village, not the fastest or the smartest neither. In fact, she was not at all the one that people would point at and say, "That one will do great things." However, Elara was the kind of child who noticed small things. She noticed when the soil was too dry, when the bird had stopped singing, or when someone smiled with their mouth but not with their eyes. She noticed, and she cared with her whole heart. And because she cared, people often gave her things to carry. Sometimes just a basket that was too heavy, or a message that needed to reach someone fast. Sometimes a task nobody else wanted to look after because it was not glorious. And sometimes a fear, a worry, a doubt, or an open heart that needed to be held, not to break. Elara has a trustworthy soul, the old women said. Elara has patient hands, the men said. Elara will manage, everyone said. And usually she did. But one year something in the valley changed. The rains did not come when they should have come, so the river became thin and grey, and the wells sank lower and lower. The goats began to chew bark from the trees to ease their thirst, and the fields cracked open like old pottery. At first the villagers said, "It will pass." Then they said, "Someone should do something." But as usual, that someone was always someone else. So finally, no one had done anything, apart from Elara, who was delivering water from her own storage to the ones suffering the most. One day, when there was no water left to drink, and everyone finally realized that the situation was unsustainable, they gathered beneath an old and rather dry fig tree, and the elders spoke of a legend. Beyond the northern ridge stood a mountain called Arden, the Stone Heart. It was said that deep inside the mountain slept an ancient spring, sealed behind 7 gates of rock. Long ago, when the valley was dying because of drought, someone had climbed the mountain, entered the stone, and opened the spring to save the valley. "But that was a hero," said the baker. "A real one," said the blacksmith. "Tall, probably," added the baker. "With a sword," said the blacksmith. "And we do not have a hero now," added the shepherd, who was always very realistic, as he liked to say. The neighbors thought he was rather negative, but they never dared to actually tell him. However, now everyone nodded in agreement. They didn't have a hero at hand. Then the old village grandmother, who had been silent for so long that people had almost forgotten that she could speak, lifted her stick and pointed to Elara. "She will go." The village became very quiet. Elara looked behind her, because surely the grandmother was pointing at someone else. But there was only a chicken. And the chicken looked very offended. "Me?" Elara asked finally, when she realized she couldn't have pointed at anyone else. The grandmother nodded. "But I'm not a hero." Elara grasped for air. "There must be a mistake here." "No," said the grandmother. "Still, you may survive." This was not comforting, and Elara was seriously wondering why she always ended up doing what nobody else wanted to do. The blacksmith frowned. "She's too small." The baker nodded. "Too quiet." The shepherd added. "And she doesn't look heroic at all." Elara wanted to agree with all of them. She wanted to say, "Yes, exactly, thank you," Finally, someone's being reasonable. But then she looked at the fields, the dry well, the trees dropping their leaves too early, the children pressing their tongues against their cracked lips, and something in her chest became very still. "I will go," she said, desperately hoping that it was the right decision, and secretly cursing the grown man who didn't lift a finger. As this was still a magical land, even if no one alive had seen actual magic, everyone expected the sky to open, or a golden eagle to descend, or at least a sword to appear in her hand, or, in fact, any sign that could turn this young girl into a hero. But nothing happened. Only a goat sneezed loudly. Elara reluctantly started to get ready. She didn't feel heroic at all. In fact, she felt very, very small and rather lost. The grandmother gave her a sack of barley cakes and a clay bottle of water and a small brown seed. "What is this?" Elara asked. "A reminder," said the grandmother. "Of what?" "That everything large begins small." This was not really comforting either, but Elara put the seed in her pocket. At dawn she began to walk. The mountain was much further than she thought, and it looked much larger from up close. This was often the problem with mountains. From the village Ardan looked noble and blue, but from the path it looked rude and enormous and unnecessarily vertical. Elara walked. The sun rose and set and rose again. The sack grew heavier, her sandals filled with dust, and her spirits remained low. But by midday on the second day she'd reached the first gate. It was a great slab of stone set into the mountainside, carved with words so old that moss had grown inside the letters. The words said, "Only the strong may pass." Elara sat down in front of it. "Well," she said, "that's unfortunate, because I'm not very strong." She waited, but the gate did not move. She pushed it as hard as she could, but the gate did not move. She kicked it, but the gate remained motionless. Elara took out a barley cake and ate half of it angrily, cursing all the villagers in her head. Then she noticed something. At the bottom of the gate, where the stone met the earth, a little ant was carrying a crumb much larger than itself. The ant climbed over one grain of sand, slipped, fell, then picked up the crumb and began again. It did not look inspired, did not make speeches. It simply returned to the crumb, again and again and again. Elara watched it for a long time, until the ant disappeared under the stone with the crumb. Then she looked at the gate. "Only the strong may pass," she read again. She placed both hands on the stone and whispered, "I may not be strong as the blacksmith, but I can go step by step and always begin again, like the little ant." She pushed the gate again, and the gate trembled. A thin line appeared, and the stone slowly opened. Behind it was a tunnel leading deeper into the mountain. Elara stepped inside, a little bit more confident. The second gate stood in darkness. Its words glowed faintly. "Only the fearless may pass." Elara laughed so loudly that a bat fell from the ceiling and complained in a high, squeaking voice. Elara quickly apologized. "I'm absolutely not fearless," she said to the void, slightly trembling, as the sudden movement of the bat made her heart skip a beat. The tunnel was cold. Water dripped somewhere unseen, and the dark pressed against her skin. She thought of turning back, Imagine returning to the village, everyone saying, "At least she tried." It would be such a soft sentence, so easy to hide inside it. Maybe they would finally send a blacksmith instead of a girl. But then she remembered the dry wells. She remembered the children, the grandmother's eyes, and the dead flowers. She didn't turn around. She just sat down and let herself be afraid. She did not pretend to be fine. She did not sing loudly to cover it, and did not shout, "I'm brave," in the voice people use when they are trying to convince themselves. She just sat there, trembling. After a while, she stood up, laid her hand on the door, and said, "I'm afraid, and I'm still here. I can do it, afraid." The gate opened. The third gate was high on the wall, covered in roots. Its words said, "Only those who do not fall may pass." Elara stared at it. Then she looked down at her scratched knees, dusty elbows, and the small bruise on her hip from slipping on a rock earlier. "This mountain has very unrealistic standards," she muttered. She tried to climb the roots, following the ones that looked like they had been stepped on before. She fell. She tried again. She fell again. She tried a third time and somehow managed to fall in a more creative direction, but she still fell. For a while she lay on her back and looked at the ceiling of the cave. A root hung above her, thin and pale, reaching through stone towards water it had not yet found. "How do you keep going?" Elara asked it. The root did not answer. But Elara understood something anyway. The root did not grow easily. It didn't follow a path without obstacles. It probably changed paths 1,000 times to find the cracks in the rock, but it still grew, because somewhere below there was water, and no matter the path it took, it had to reach that water. So she got up. This time, instead of rushing upward on the path that seemed obvious, she moved like a root, slowly, feeling the stone and the roots, finding small spaces to hold her, using the stone, not fighting it. When she reached the top, she pressed her forehead to the gate. "I fell," she said, "1,000 times. I tried to follow the wrong path, but I learned from the falls, and I found my way to the top. I didn't remain fallen." The roots loosened, and the gate opened. The fourth gate was standing in front of her, but by this time she was tired enough to dislike all legends in general. The words on the gate said, "Only those who carry no burden may pass." Elara almost started to cry. Because of all the impossible instructions, this one felt the most unfair. She carried the sack and the water to start with, and with every step they felt more and more heavy. But she also carried the secrets, doubts, and the fears of everyone. She carried the fear of failing. She carried the hope that the villagers had in her. She carried old words people had given her without asking. "Too small, too quiet, not the one," or "She will manage." All her life she had been carrying things. She sat down and took everything out of her sack. The barley cakes, the clay bottle, a little knife, a piece of cloth, and the little brown seed. She held the seed in her palm, turning it from one side to the other. So small, yet so much meaning attached to it. Then she understood. The gate did not ask her to abandon what mattered. It asked her to stop carrying what was not hers. So Elara whispered into the dark, "I will carry my responsibility, but I will not carry everyone's doubts and expectations. I will carry care and love, but I will not carry their fears. I will carry my tasks, but I will not carry the idea that I must be perfect to accomplish it. The sack suddenly felt lighter as the stone opened. In front of the fifth gate, the tunnel widened into a cavern full of mirrors. In fact, the gate itself was a mirror too. The words above the gate said, "Only those who know who they are may pass." In the mirrors, Elara saw herself in many forms. Elara the failure, Elara the hero, Elara the child, Elara the fool, Elara returning to the village empty-handed, Elara saving everyone and being praised, Elara being praised so much that she became insufferable, which was actually one of the most frightening reflections. She stood among all these versions of herself and felt dizzy. "Which one is true?" she asked. The mountain answered for the first time. Its voice was deep, slow, and full of gravel. "All of them. None of them. Keep walking." She found this really annoying, but also strangely helpful. She looked into the mirror of the door, which was the only one that didn't show any reflections. "I do not need to know my whole story," she said. "I only need to know the next true step and to take it." The mirrors cracked into silver dust, and the fifth gate opened. The sixth gate was small, so small that Elara had to kneel. Its words said, "Only the humble may pass." Elara thought this gate seemed easier than the others, which should have made her suspicious, but it didn't. She crawled forward, and with every movement the passage narrowed. Her shoulders scraped stone, her breath became short, and finally, halfway through, she got stuck. This was effectively humiliating. Heroes, she felt, should not get stuck like this. She pushed and twisted, but nothing happened. Then she heard a tiny sound. A beetle was walking beside her, carrying a piece of leaf. "Excuse me," Elara whispered. "Do you know the way through?" The beetle paused. It seemed surprised to be consulted. It didn't answer, but it turned and crawled along a narrow crack in the wall. Elara followed the direction of its tiny body. She shifted one shoulder, softened her ribs, exhaled, and moved, not by force, but by yielding. She slid through. On the other side, she bowed to the beetle. "Thank you." The beetle continued walking, unimpressed by her gratitude. But the sixth gate at the end of the tunnel opened. At last Elara reached the seventh gate. It stood before the heart of the mountain. Behind it she could hear water. Not much, just a whisper. But after the dry valley, that whisper sounded like a choir. The words on the final gate were simple. "Only the one who never gives up may pass." Elara stood very still. Then she sank to the ground, because she had given up many times. On the path she wanted to turn back. In the dark she wanted to stop. At the root she had fallen and cursed. In the tunnel she had imagined excuses. In the narrow passage she had considered becoming a stone. "I have given up," she said. The mountain was silent. "I have given up in my mind 100 times." The gate did not move. Elara closed her eyes. Then she said slowly, "But I kept choosing again." The mountain listened. "I stopped. I cried. I doubted. I rested. I was afraid. I fell. I complained. I was not graceful. I was not pure. I was not shining. But after every ending, I made one more beginning." The seventh gate began to glow. Elara placed a small brown seed in front of it. "I think, maybe, Perseverance is not never feeling defeated, she said. Maybe perseverance is letting life begin again through you, one more time. The seed cracked, a root entered the stone, a green shoot rose, and a beautiful flower came to bloom on top. The seventh gate opened. Inside the heart of the mountain, the spring was trapped beneath a stone basin. Elara placed both hands on the rock and pushed. Nothing happened. She laughed. Of course. Of course, the final task would not be easy either. So she pushed again, and again, and again. Not strong, but patient like a root. Not fearless, but present. Not unburdened, but clear. Maybe not unfallen, but still going. The rock shifted, and a thread of water appeared. Then another, and another. The spring burst upward, silver and cold and alive. It rushed over Elara's hands, her arms, her face. It filled the basin, then the cavern, then the channels curved beneath the mountain long before anyone in the village had a name. By the time Elara stumbled out of the mountain, the sky was changing. Far below, the river began to move, first a trickle, then as a song. The villagers saw the water returning and ran towards it, laughing, crying, shouting. When Elara came down the path, covered in mud, scratches, and an impressive amount of moss, everyone became silent. The blacksmith stared. The baker cried. The shepherd checked her wounds and declared her surprisingly heroic. The grandmother came forward and placed both hands on Elara's face. Well, she asked. Elara looked back at the mountain. It was not opened by strength, she said. No, said the grandmother. Not by fearlessness. No. Not by never falling. No. Elara looked at the river, alive again beneath the evening light. It opened every time I started again. The grandmother smiled. Yes. Years later, children would ask Elara how she saved the valley. Of course, they wanted the exciting version. They wanted to hear that she fought a dragon, broke the mountain with one blow, or shouted a magic word while lightning struck dramatically behind her. But Elara always disappointed them. I walked, she said. That's all, they asked. Yes, I walked, I fell, I rested. Sometimes I complained. I asked the beetle for directions, and then I walked again. The children frowned. That does not sound heroic. Elara smiled. No, but it's how most true things are done. And every year, when the rains returned and the valley turned green, Elara planted one seed at the foot of the mountain. Not like the mountain needed proof, but she liked to remember. Everything large begins small. Every step taken in the right direction counts, and even stone can open for the one who starts again every time.